All right, why can the Redwoods go after that? Well, because they're 3-6 and the Chaos are 4-5. So if the Redwoods win, they go to 4-6, and the Chaos lose, they go to 4-6. We're going to find that out right away, Friday night. So California has a pretty daunting task. They have to beat the Utah Archers, number one. Number two, they have to beat them by a lot. If you look at the score differential, which is the number one deciding factor for a playoff tie, they have a score differential right now, the Redwoods, of -31.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. And on this episode, a couple things that I want to get to with this episode. Top of the show, we're going to talk the PLL trade deadline and why so many people, I think, seemed like they were underwhelmed with the trade deadline. I'll give you my thoughts on why I wasn't all that surprised with it. I've had those similar thoughts in previous episodes, but we'll kind of go back to those and I'll touch on those once again. So again, that'll be top of the show here, segment one. Second half of the show, I want to get into kind of putting a cap on Athletes Unlimited here as their season just wrapped up over this past weekend. To start out the show, obviously, you can find the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Odyssey as well, among others. But I saw this earlier today before getting ready for this episode. I saw a notification from Good Pods, another site that I'm on, Good Pods, and they sent me some rankings for the show on their site. So I saw that, got pretty excited, wanted to share that with you all. Make sure to go follow the show there as well so we can improve on some of these rankings going forward. But just quickly, it says number 5 on the top 100 for indie sports news for their monthly podcast rankings. So I thought that was pretty big. So I wanted to share that with you all. 29th on the indie sports news chart all time. So again, thought that was a pretty big deal. So wanted to share that. It's 23rd on the sports news monthly chart and 48th on the indie news monthly chart. So again, thank you to anybody that follows there on Good Pods. If you don't, go follow there. Follow the show on there. So hopefully maybe over the next few months we can bring up those numbers even just a little bit more. But again, saw that earlier today and wanted to share that with you. But to dive into this episode, I talked top of the show, we're going to get into the PLL trade deadline and maybe what some people would say was a very kind of lackluster trade deadline, and then Athletes Unlimited to round out the show. But I thought it was interesting that people questioned why the Redwoods and the Water Dogs specifically didn't what we would call sell at the trade deadline. And it's interesting because I've said it on multiple occasions on multiple different episodes for probably about the last month or so. And you can even go as far back as the episode that I did with Brandon Biaggi, where I brought him on, kind of talked his thoughts of what a Redwoods rebuild, at least at that point in time, may have looked like. And we did a pretty deep dive into that on that episode. So go back again, wherever you get your podcasts, you can listen to that, because I still think it kind of holds true to today as well, even going back several episodes like that. But I spoke to him about that on that episode in particular. And one thing that I really hit on with him is that the reason I don't think you'll ever see a team like the Redwoods, in this case, talking specifically to 2024 here, a team like the Redwoods and where they're at in the standings, or a team like the Water Dogs and where they are with their season, that you'll never see teams like that in a given year do as what I said, what we would call kind of selling during the season, is because the PLL's basically set it up. And I said this to Brandon on that episode, even going back to then, was the league is basically set up to where they're trying to make it so that teams don't do that, so that they kind of steer away from doing those kinds of things. I said it to Brandon on that episode, when you have things set up in the off season where you have the trade windows, you have free agency, you have the draft, and now you had the championship series in there as well, where coaches can evaluate talent. I mentioned how one instance last February was that Coach Pressler said that he brought in Ronan Jacoby because of his performance in the championship series last winter. So when you have all these different things in place to where teams can drastically change their teams in one off season, I think that's where these coaches slash GMs, obviously, during the off seasons, that's where they tend to look towards is, hey, let's say the Redwoods earlier this year, or the Water Dogs, hey, this season isn't going the way that we thought that it would or the way that we had hoped, but let's not rush into anything right now. Let's not try to look at making those drastic roster changes right now. Let's maybe try to plug and play a few guys here and there, which I think the Redwoods have done a little bit. Obviously, the Water Dogs, with their depth in the midfield, have the opportunity to really move some pieces around, especially in that midfield unit. But again, you're not going to see teams like that where they're just drastically changing their rosters mid-season like that, because you even look at the trade deadline too. People were wondering, well, why didn't they trade some of these guys, right? Why didn't the Redwoods trade somebody like Rob Pennell and maybe a Chris Gray or whoever and try to get something back in return for them? And it's because, and I thought of this earlier today, is because if the trade deadline was, let's say, 3 weeks ago, we'd be having a totally different conversation. But when you talk about the trade deadline being the Monday or Tuesday before the last week of the regular season, you're not going to get a ton of value for these guys when they're only going to be on their team for potentially a couple of games, if even that many. And, that's if they're not signed through next season. So again, it's if it was a couple of weeks ago, if it was maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, yeah, we're having a totally different conversation, because now you can try to get more for some of these guys, and you go back to teams not wanting to blow it up in season. The Atlas during that COVID year, obviously different set of circumstances with the shorter season because of COVID, but they traded all their star players in the offseason and got, multiple first round picks, multiple second round picks, and things like that. I think because the trade deadline is so late in the season now for the PLL, you're not going to see teams getting that kind of value unless it's for a guy that's signed for multiple seasons past the current season. So if you had the Redwoods trading a guy that's not just signed through 2025, but maybe even 2026, I think that's where you would start to see a team say, okay, we'd be willing to give up one of those late first, maybe early second round picks in order to get them. Not that a team like that would be picking early second round, but you kind of get what I'm saying, is they'd be more willing, I think, to give up maybe one of those last few picks of the first round. And even then, I think they'd be a little hesitant to do it. But I don't see that necessarily being the case unless the PLL were to bump back the trade deadline a few weeks. And again, I don't see them doing that either, because what you have to realize about the way that it's sort of set up is that they're trying to make it so that these games matter, even when we all kind of know they really don't. Like, there's audio at the beginning of the show, and I'll run it back here in just a second, but there's audio that we opened the show with where Paul Rabel himself is actually on his podcast that he's been doing lately, where he's actually saying, yeah, mathematically, the Redwoods could still technically make the playoffs. Like, there is actually still mathematically a path where they can make it, and it's, they just have to beat the Archers by 11, and then, the Chaos have to beat whoever by 11 and this and that. And it's like, Paul, you basically could have just stopped after saying they had to beat the Archers, because I don't think that too many people are going to pick them to beat the Archers in that game. And then you proceed to say, oh, and not only do they have to clear that hurdle, but they have to beat them by 11, which there haven't been too many games historically where a team has won by that much. So I think that when you say, like, oh, they just have to do this, and you're thinking, okay, well, that's, not the easiest thing in the world given how their season's gone, and then you pile on by saying, oh, by the way, they have to win easily by 10, 12, 15 goals, and then they have to hope that this other team ahead of them basically does the same thing to their opponent. It's like, okay, so basically you had us in the first half. You said there's a way, but there's basically almost a less than zero chance of either of those events happening, and now you have to kind of combine those two for this sort of perfect storm to happen. But again, like I said, the reason, to kind of sum it all up, the reason why you don't see these teams blow it up mid-season, and we've really never seen them do so, is because the way that the league has set things up to, I think, maybe encourage teams and encourage these head coaches to steer clear of doing that. Like, you go back to the first year of the PLL in the playoffs, the teams that didn't make the playoff championship bracket, whatever you want to call it, were put in that sort of that secondary bracket, and the winner of that secondary bracket got the number 1 overall pick. So again, there was no incentive to tank even in year one, because if you didn't do that, even if you didn't win the championship, you still got the number 1 pick in the draft, right? And now it's like, hey, you finish in the top 4, you get to go to the championship series, right? So there's different things. And then I've even talked about, like I said, the different things that happen during the off season. So there's just so many different things. And like I said, too, the trade deadline being so late in the year, so you're not going to get like crazy high value on some of these trades that are happening. And that's why we only saw the 2 trades go down at the deadline, where you got what we assume will be a late 2nd round pick and probably somewhere like a mid 3rd round pick in those 2 deals respectively. So again, just the way that they've set it up is so that teams are not encouraged to tank, because ultimately that hurts their product on the field. So coming up in segment 2, second and final segment here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, we're going to put a bow on the Athletes Unlimited season here in 2024. Welcome back. Second and final segment here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and Odyssey. Also, Talk Top of the show. Apparently doing very well, the show is on Good Pods as well. So if you haven't checked it out there, I encourage you to do so and sort of help out some of those rankings, as I found out here earlier today. I shared those with you, top of the show. But again, segment 1 talked the PLL, sort of the trade deadline, and why it was, I think in a lot of people's terms, would say lackluster, as we only saw the 2 deals go down, and sort of why I think that is, and how it's sort of by design from the PLL. But also that's kind of funny audio from Rabel there as well, where he says, basically, the Redwoods have a chance, but you might as well make it less than 0. But I'm still going to say that they have a chance. So I just got a good laugh out of that, so I wanted to share that with you. But as promised, segment 2, we're going to finish this thing out, putting a cap on Athletes Unlimited here for 2024, season 4 of Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse. And finally, I talked about it about a month ago now at the start of their season with Tari Kandamiri. We're both big fans of Sam Apuzzo. She finally does get it done. She gets that number 1 spot in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse after coming in second each of the last 2 years to goalie Taylor Marino, who actually, for I believe it was the first time, finished outside the top 4 this year, did Marino, which was a bit of a surprise, I would say, for sure. But again, Sam Apuzzo kind of gets over that hump, gets that number 1 spot, and that was really cool to see. And I believe I did read after the fact, after the games ended this past Sunday, I believe I had read that Apuzzo's now the first player ever in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse to finish in the top 4 each of the first 4 seasons. So just another kind of accolade for her in her Athletes Unlimited career. But like I said, it was kind of surprising too for Marino to finish outside of that top 4. She's typically, along with Apuzzo, been a mainstay in the top 4 week in, week out, season after season. Like I said, she had been the 2-time defending champ in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse. So very uncharacteristic to see her finish the year outside the top four, but it was also a bit of a down year, I would say, for Moreno in cage. There was a couple games I remember throughout the season that I saw where she actually took herself out of games because of just her poor performance in those games, would later reinsert herself into the game later on. But yeah, just it was kind of an interesting year for her. Didn't seem like she was typically her normal self. There were games where, of course, she was fantastic and making some unreal saves and being more of what we're accustomed to seeing from her. But yeah, there was maybe 2 or 3 games in there sprinkled in throughout the season where it's just like, man, for whatever reason, just didn't seem like she had it that day. And I think that in the end of the day, that hurt her in terms of those individual points because of those poor performances that she had. But I also think, I don't remember what the outcome was here in week 4, but I do know those first 3 games against Apuzzo's teams, she also went 0-3 in those games. So obviously having those head-to-head points go in favor of Sam Apuzzo in that case also didn't help Taylor Marino either. Charlotte North, though, had a absolutely unreal year, in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse, set the single season record for goals, had over 50 pretty easily, I would say, as well, for Charlotte North, who was also part of the PLL All-Star festivities a couple weeks ago, as they brought in some women's players as well, such as Charlotte North and Alex Ost-Holman were part of those events in Louisville. So just an unreal summer for Charlotte North. Like I said, had the single season goals record for Athletes Unlimited. Also had, I forget if it was the single game goals record or maybe it was points record, but had 8 in one game and set a record for that as well. Charlotte North ended up finishing second on the individual points leaderboard behind just Sam Apuzzo, and was, I believe it was, a 2-time captain here this season in Athletes Unlimited. So a fantastic summer from her. And then the rookies as well were as advertised. Like, that was one of the things, going back, talking with Tari a few episodes ago at the beginning of the Athletes Unlimited season, just a 4-week season for them. But I talked to her about some of the rookies and who she was excited to see. The rookies were as advertised this season, which was a great thing for Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse. You talk about that top 20 on the individual leaderboard. There was 5 rookies represented in the top 20. Ellie Macera was the highest rated one at 7th overall. Izzy Skane was 12th. Cassidy Spillis was 15th. And Emily Knowles was 17th. And Cassidy Weeks actually rounded out the top 20 at 20th overall. And then Knowles actually finished as a all-defensive team member and also, I believe, won Defender of the Year as well. So again, just a super star-studded, loaded, really fun rookie class. And that's not even mentioning players like Isabella Peterson and Sydney Black, who had fantastic seasons as well. Didn't finish inside the top 20 overall, but obviously can't forget about them when you talk about some of these rookies as well. And I think just my overall thoughts about Athletes Unlimited and just what they've been able to do for women's lacrosse and women's pro lacrosse in specific, and kind of how they tie in with some of the other pro leagues like the PLL, the NLL, and even just talking college as well, is that it's just been so exciting to watch. And I think that the product that we're getting with these leagues is just so great. Like, all of them are tied with ESPN, like Athletes Unlimited. Their games primarily this season were on ESPN2 and ESPNU. They did have a couple games here and there on Bally Sports. Obviously, the PLL is on ESPN platforms. The NLL is on ESPN platforms. And college lacrosse, you can get a ton of games on ESPN networks and platforms as well. And I think that's just been such a huge thing for the sport of lacrosse and helping it move forward into sort of the modern era. And I also think, when talking even just a second ago about the rookies in Athletes Unlimited. I think the same can be said about the PLL and the NLL as well. These rookies that are coming in and these young players in maybe their second and third years that are coming into these leagues and having the kind of immediate impacts that they're having, I think has been a fantastic thing. Like you talk about Charlotte North, finished second on the leaderboard this year in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse, set those records that I mentioned earlier on this segment in her now third year in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse. So and you look at the PLL, you talk about guys like TJ Malone, probably going to be Rookie of the Year, right? Connor Schellenberger has had a huge impact on the Atlas offense this year, right? You talk about Jake Pacino with the Outlaws, just different guys like that. The list goes on and on. But the impact that these young players are having on these professional leagues, whether it be PLL, NLL, Athletes Unlimited, whatever the case may be, it's just been such a fun thing to watch with all of these leagues. And I think it's just going to make the sport better going forward, because you realize these players are at the start of their careers. Like, they have so many years left ahead of them that they can still do this at a high level. Like, you look at Jeff Teat and what he's done this season. I believe Jeff Teat's only about 27, 28 years old, according to his bio on the PLL website. So again, he's another guy that, you know, maybe he's been around for a couple of years now, but he still has plenty of years left in him, and I think he can still do it at such an extremely high level. So I think right now it's just been so fun to see how entertaining and exciting that these products that these professional leagues are putting out, and now it can basically go year round, where you can go college in the spring on ESPN, you got Athletes Unlimited and the PLL during the summer months on ESPN, maybe like 2 months off or whatever it is until you get into NLL season, and then you're rolling straight through winter with the NLL on ESPN, and now the PLL gets in on some of the action as well with the championship series around February, and that as well on ESPN. So again, I just think that right now is just such a big time for professional lacrosse. So that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. Top of the show, again, we talked about the PLL trade deadline and sort of the lack of moves that were made, and why I thought that was saying that it was basically by design from the league. In segment 2, we put a bow on year 4 in Athletes Unlimited Lacrosse, but that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.